The scientific method has been around for 1,000 years, maybe more, depending on how you define it. It's been used to prove the existence of bacteria, DNA, and black holes in the fabric of space. So why not supernatural phenomena? If the public at large is ever going to understand the spirit realm and its relationship to the world we know, it's going to require proof of that realm's existence. And why shouldn't it? We're a civilization of skeptics. Before we accept something, we want to be certain that it's real. The first step in obtaining that proof is making observations. They may come in the form of personal experiences, but we can't verify personal experiences. So wherever possible, we try to capture our observations in video recordings, audio recordings, and digital meter readings of temperature changes and electromagnetic energy levels. In addition, we make extensive notes about when and where the data was collected and under what circumstances. Once we have this information, we come up with hypotheses. For example, we may say that spirits prefer to draw on a certain kind of energy when they're trying to manifest. The next step in the process is to test that hypothesis. We can't do that in a laboratory the way a research scientist would do it. Ghosts tend to appear in the places where people live and work, such as houses and hotels and theaters, which seldom offer the paranormal investigator the luxury of controlled conditions. So we do the best we can. With the help of other investigators who we know we can trust, we try to duplicate as closely as possible the conditions under which we collected our first round of data. If we get the same results, we know that we're onto something. If we don't, we're back to square one. But even if the results are the same, we still have a lot of work to do because we're not operating in a lab. We have to observe the phenomena in different types of settings and under different conditions. And we have to capture the kind of data that will allow other observers to draw the same conclusions we did. It sounds like a lot of work. It is. But how else are we going to prove that ghosts and other supernatural entities exist in our world? Or that death isn't the barrier many of us believe it is? This is an excerpt from Seeking Spirits, The Lost Cases of Taps by Jason Hawes and Grant Wilson. Every culture has its ghosts, its legends, its mysteries.
From UFOs to haunted houses, psychic visions to cryptids, we explore the stories that defy explanation and what they reveal about what it means to be human.
I'm Chris Daly.
And I'm Ryan Geckner. We're anthropologists asking big questions about belief, experience, and the unknown.
This is Beyond the Human.
All right, welcome back to Beyond the Human. We're back for a special spooky season episode where we're going to talk a little bit about ghost hunting. Which we think you probably are familiar with if you listen to this podcast, or if you're not, please explain yourself in the comments. But no, what we're going to do is we're going to really dig into, what it means to be a ghost hunter, what the culture is surrounding ghost hunting, and sort of take an anthropological approach to understanding contemporary ghost hunting practices and paranormal research. And so before we jump into kind of the specifics of what we mean or what people in general mean when they're talking about ghost hunting, just a quick reminder of what we mean when we're saying the culture of ghost hunting, because that's really what we're going to be digging into in this episode. So if we go back to our first episode where I kind of break down my favorite personal definition of culture, there's a handful of things that we all kind of look for when we think about culture. And some of these that we're going to talk about today are things like material culture. So the things that people make and use in their day-to-day lives, the language they use, their behaviors. So when we talk about ghost hunting, we're going to talk later about EVP sessions and what those are. And those are a specific kind of behavior within this sort of cultural context. And just the fact that to have a culture, you have to have a sort of community of shared knowledge. And this sense of being an insider versus an outsider. And these are going to be things that we're going to kind of pick apart as paranormal investigators ourselves, but also as anthropologists, and kind of help you understand sort of some of these hidden things that maybe you might not think about when you think about ghost hunting. So, Chris, let's start with kind of talking about what makes someone a ghost hunter. We spent a lot of time talking about this when we were prepping for this episode. We thought we knew what we were talking about, and then we phoned some friends, and then we realized we weren't thinking about other things, and then this whole category got a lot bigger and messier. And so Yeah. So what do we mean when we say, someone's a ghost hunter?
Well, I think one of the most important things that we got into as we sort of prepped for this was what's a ghost hunter versus a paranormal investigator. We always call ourselves paranormal investigators, not ghost hunters. And I think, the term ghost hunter has a couple of different meanings, and that's what's made things confusing for a
Yeah.
lot of people. Really, the term ghost hunter comes from a TV show. I mean, let's be honest.
What TV show could it have come from?
Maybe ghost hunters? I don't know. Which is kind of why I picked the quote that I did
Yeah, yeah,
in the
no,
middle of this
yeah, it
episode.
makes perfect sense.
Because you should pay homage to
Yes, we should. We
to the
should.
people who create the term. So Ghost Hunters as a TV show really started this idea of calling yourself
Hmm.
a ghost hunter.
Certainly popularized for sure.
Yeah, I mean maybe there were people who might have used it, but it
Sure.
really popularized
Yeah.
it. So thank you to Taps
Yes.
for doing that. But what is a ghost hunter, right? So, it's somebody who goes and seeks out ghosts
Ghosts.
specifically in the realm of the paranormal. I mean, we can go hunt other things in the
Yeah.
paranormal, but it's specific to ghosts, obviously. But there are some sort of characteristics that I think make it a unique category of person. A lot of people will go and they'll participate in tours, walking tours of a haunted city or something like that. And I love those.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I don't consider that to be ghost hunting. That's part of
Hmm.
tourism. It's called dark tourism. And we should probably talk about that at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
But so when we think about ghost hunters, we think about people who are leading their own investigations and actively going to different places to seek out the paranormal, not being led by somebody else. I think that's one of the most important characteristics.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think that's all. So what would you consider?
Yeah, so I think the thing that always gets me with the term ghost hunter is like some people get really like prickly about being called ghost
True.
hunters. Like
We do.
we do, yeah, I mean we do, but I mean I don't really care that much, honestly. But I've read people and read stuff that people have written or heard from people, just like in person about how like they don't like to be called a ghost hunter. That there is this kind of sense that it is less serious. That if you're a ghost hunter, you're someone who I've heard some people say that like just using the term hunter in that context is kind of off-putting.
Oh, we don't use guns.
Yeah. Right. And that's what people get. Like they're like, well, we're not hunting spirits. And like I'm not to like disparage that take, but like, for us it's like I don't really, for me it's six one half dozen the other. But because we're anthropologists and because we spend a lot of time thinking about things that probably don't need to be thought that hard about.
Certainly that other people don't want to think.
Yeah, right. When we sat down to do this episode, we were like, okay, so if you're a ghost hunter, you're not, just passive, not really passively, but you're leading investigations, like you said, but then there is also this sort of idea that you are sort of investing in this advancement of our knowledge of the paranormal in the sense that you're not just going out to be scared in a spooky building that's probably full of asbestos. And so there is this intent.
Or aspergillus.
Or aspergillus, that's right. Yeah, we can't forget our best friend aspergillus. We need something about aspergillus for this podcast, like a sticker or something.
Yeah.
Because it has now come up in 3 episodes.
Right.
But there is this intent of trying to look for things or trying to disprove things that might be perceived as paranormal activity to sort of legitimize, well, not necessarily legitimize, but to try and capture knowledge about the paranormal.
So as opposed to the experience or somebody
Yeah,
who just wanted to go out
yeah.
and have an experience.
Be in the Sally house and maybe see a flashlight turn on, right? Or just visit the Sally house and do the walking tour and
Right.
read the little signs on the wall that tell you what happened in each room and those sorts of things.
Or again, all those walking tours. I love those walking tours. They're a lot of fun. I love hearing the history personally. But they're a lot of fun to go out and experience that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might experience something a little weird
Mhm.
on something like that.
Mhm.
Or if you do a public investigation, you may experience something a little weird. But that doesn't make you a ghost hunter.
Right.
At least in popular conversation.
Right.
You're more of someone who wants an experience, which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, that's totally fine. We're not, I think it's important to note here and for the rest of this whole episode is that we're not really trying to gatekeep who gets to claim these terms or these like, the
Now call
culture
yourself
of
what you
being a
want.
ghost hunter. Yeah, I mean, I don't really care. But I think what our goal with this is to help people sort of understand some of the things that are maybe kind of taken for granted in the ghost hunting community or in
Yeah.
the paranormal research community as it relates to ghosts. And then the other piece of, ghost hunting or claiming to be or identifying as a ghost hunter for us is this idea of regularity. So you don't just go to a thing once and then it's like, a thing you did and you're done, but this sense that, you want to continue to engage with that type of phenomenon. Now, on the flip side of that, when we talk about being a paranormal investigator for us and in our experience talking with other researchers, there's a sense that one of the key distinctions between being a paranormal investigator and a ghost hunter is this idea of having critical thought and using critical thought as a part of your process.
And I actually want to jump in there and just say, because we're talking about that and we attribute the term ghost hunter to TAPS, we are not saying
Mm.
that TAPS are not paranormal investigators. I actually firmly put them in the
Would put them
paranormal
in that
in
camp.
the
Yeah, for
paranormal
sure.
investigator
For sure.
category. It's just that's what their TV show was called.
Right. Exactly. So like we can blame that on like NBC and sci-fi. Um, don't at me, NBC. And then the other piece of that too is this idea that for many paranormal investigators and researchers, there is this sense that they are trying to legitimize the field. So there is this added goal of trying to collect evidence in a way that it can be taken seriously. I'm not just trying to collect evidence because I think it's cool to say that I had a conversation with a ghost at some haunted location, but rather I'm trying to collect evidence in such a way that potentially someone who has scientific credentials could take this seriously. I think this gets a little messy when you have people who are investigators who also have scientific credentials, like us.
I think it
But
gets really messy because the scientific credentials don't make you
mean a whole lot of anything
right.
necessarily, right?
They don't
Yeah,
make you a paranormal investigator.
right.
They're sort of happenstance in some ways.
In some sense, right? Yeah, like I think that's an important piece too, is like this idea of like who has credentials and who has, the credibility of being an investigator.
Yeah, and let's dive into
Yeah.
credibility a bit more because and not specifically with the alphabet soup stuff. We'll talk about that and just we do use the term alphabet soup to mean all those letters after your
All of
name. And we've got a bunch of them and honestly, I'm not sure what they've gotten me in life.
I don't know. I mean, people
Yeah.
have to call us doctor if we want them to, so that's kind of
Yay.
cool. I guess.
I
But we're not that kind of doctors.
I don't think I've ever made
Don't
someone call me.
call me when you have a fever or whatever. Like I can't help
Well, you
you.
can, but I'm not going to be able to give it for it.
My advice won't be that good.
I'll probably take Motrin at that
Yeah.
point. So anyway, so credibility, what are the things that people think about as making an investigator credible? So we're not just talking about for us, but
Mhm.
as you talk to other people who do this kind of thing, who go
Mhm.
out and do investigations, what makes someone else credible to them? And it's really
Mhm.
interesting when you meet up with people in different spaces, be it a paracon or a paranormal conference or
Mhm.
a haunted location or wherever it is, there's certain things that people immediately start to do in
Mhm.
terms of those conversations and
Yes.
what they're doing is trying to establish credibility for
Mhm.
themselves and so the things people tend to bring up you'll hear people often talking about not just how many places they've investigated but have they done sort of the big locations,
Yeah.
have you been to Waverly?
That one comes up a lot. Like people, when we say we've been to Waverly, people are like, "Oh,
Yeah, I mean and to me it's like well that was just another place, it was a cool place, I
yeah,
actually
it
really
was cool.
enjoyed
I'd
it.
go again in a heartbeat." Yeah.
But people bring up very specific locations, have you done those? And then there's a question of, well, but do you do private homes?
Right.
And that's a very different kind of investigation. And,
Mhm.
it's one that I would say I've done more in the private home world than I have of the big locations, even though I've done a lot of the
Yeah.
big locations. But I've done far more private homes.
And I think we can see how that is kind of legitimate, or not really legitimized, but like um, sort of embodied in groups, specifically with regards to taps. So if you're not familiar, taps, when they first, came on the scene on sci-fi as ghost hunters, and everyone was like drooling over their show because it was excellent at the beginning. Um, you
And
could
what was unique in
become,
the
it was
beginning. Now
unique,
there's so
right,
many of them,
right.
it's
Yeah, it
different.
was different, exactly. You could be, if you had an investigative group, you could apply to be a TAPS family team,
I think you still
and
can.
you still can.
Yeah.
And one of the things that being a TAPS affiliated team did for you was gave you this level of credibility to go do private homes, because
Hmm.
there was like this whole background checking thing, and like you had to be, it was a lot of like making sure you were safe to be in other people's homes. Like if
Which I'm
you,
all for.
which is valid. Yeah, like I'm not, yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. We probably should do more of that.
Yeah.
But, I think it's, you can see exactly this sort of attempt to build credibility through investigating private homes, and some of those ways where it was kind of put in place structurally in
Hmm.
groups like TAPS Family and things like that.
And investigating private homes where somebody requested you come in,
Mhm.
not like, hey, my
Mhm.
friend's house is on
Right. Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Where it was almost, it's almost this idea of doing paranormal investigation as a service.
Right, right. Um, and part of that is also that you don't charge money
Right. Yeah,
for
that's
that
a big thing,
service.
right? Like if you are trying to charge money for doing paranormal investigation, like that is a major faux pas in
Yes.
the paranormal world.
And I happen to agree with that, but
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So yeah, there's this idea of where have you investigated? How often have you investigated? Is it just public locations? Is it private homes? So people immediately when they meet up start, I'm going to call it bragging,
Sure.
um,
Posturing, we can call it that
posturing.
too. And the thing is, we do it too. That's the thing, is like we do it to a degree.
I try not to
We try
because it
not to,
feels
but we do. It
weird.
does feel weird.
So that's part of what gives you
Hmm.
credibility. Another piece of credibility is the equipment you use, which
Yeah.
is really, I have a lot of feelings about that,
Hmm.
because equipment costs money and some of it
Hmm.
costs, honestly, a lot of money.
Yep.
And I don't feel like you should be judged based on how
That
much
doesn't
money
make
you
or
have.
break whether or not you're a paranormal investigator, yeah.
Right.
Or that
But
you're a credible investigator, that you do investigations in a way that produce good evidence or
yeah.
capture good
So,
evidence, things like
we
that.
talk about the kinds of equipment people have, you know, do you have the latest and greatest?
Hmm.
Versus do you use digital recorders, flashlights, maybe
Yep.
an EMF meter of some type, not a specific one, but just of some type? Or do you use things like millimeters, REM pods, SLS cameras, or
Yep.
some of the fringier?
Yeah, and well, and I think, to
Um,
get back to like this idea of like it being the culture of the paranormal, these are all those pieces of the material culture of being a paranormal investigator or a ghost hunter that are like, these are all the things that are taken for granted, and that, it's assumed that, oh, if you're an investigator, you'll know what all of these things are,
right,
because you
right,
just listed off a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like, well, yeah, I know what all of those are because
right,
I've used
right.
them all. But, if you're someone who is outside of this sphere, you may not know what some of those are, even if you watch all of the shows.
That's true. And I think later on we'll talk a little bit more about that tech piece.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, we'll
But
come back to
I
that.
do think credibility, I get bothered by the idea that your credibility can be determined based on
Yeah,
these material things that you have, again, because of the cost of these things.
yeah.
The other piece is I actually think we've gotten our best evidence on digital recorders,
The most basic stuff.
on a simple camera.
Yep. Film cameras always, for some reason,
Yeah, I
the
know.
best evidence.
Um,
It's
you know,
annoying to get that film developed now, but
oh, it
they
is.
seem
Yeah.
to get the
It
best
used to be
stuff.
really
You
easy.
gotta send it off. It's a pain.
Um, But so to me, that the best evidence we often get is on these really simple pieces of equipment. But yet we still talk about, well, do you have this? Do you have that? And I
Hmm.
don't know that that should determine your credibility, but it does to a degree. And that, again, that's a piece of it that kind of bothers me, but
Hmm.
whatever.
Yep.
Um, so then there's the interpretation of the evidence you get on these different things. That really, I think, drives credibility in a lot of sense. And the big one right now, or not just right now, but has been orbs.
Yeah, a big like topic of conversation is always orbs, and whether or not you believe in orbs, whether or not you think every speck of dust that shows up in a photograph is an orb. Um, and I think like for a lot of people who are maybe less experienced with doing paranormal investigation, there is like this assumption that like if you're anywhere in the world, you're probably going to get a picture with some dust in it. Like that's just going to happen. And I think a lot of people are, and understandably so, are eager to capture some type of evidence. Like, I mean, you're not doing this just because you want to walk around a house that was built in the 1800s and talk to nothing, right? The idea is that you're talking to something and you're interacting with some sort of phenomenon. And so people understandably want to capture some sort of evidence. And because dust and even insects or whatever are interpreted as some sort of paranormal phenomenon when they're captured on film or on, digital or whatever. I think it's kind of a red flag to a lot of paranormal investigators of like, oh, if you're someone who's into orbs, because like even we talk about, the differentiating between orbs versus energy trails and like what that means and how they look and all that
And
sort of thing.
what is what we would consider to be a paranormal evidence of something paranormal as
Right.
an orb versus dust, and we
Right.
catch dust like constantly. But
Constantly.
we have caught things that we look at and say, that's different.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that might actually be something paranormal.
Right.
Um, but if you're someone who's constantly collecting orbs, that decreases your
Your
credibility.
credibility for a lot of people. Yeah, for sure.
As does, which types of equipment you're using and how objective you consider that equipment.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you're using an EMF meter of some type and you're gathering, well, there's a high EMF in this entire room, well, how do you interpret that? And is
Hmm.
that objective? Is
Right.
it definitely paranormal? Can you look at that evidence and say that? And how do you interpret it?
Hmm.
And if you're seeing it everywhere or you're seeing it in a particular location, but behind that wall there's live wires, how are
Right.
you interpreting it?
Right. Or are
So
you even looking for the live wires to begin
right, right.
with?
Or are you just saying, oh my
Hmm.
God, there's
Right.
all this EMF? So that
Which is a
kind of thing.
concern.
Oh, absolutely.
Is a concern.
Absolutely.
And
But
for
that
other more normal reasons.
but that helps to determine your credibility.
Right.
How are you interpreting these different things? Are you, discovering what the baseline of the room is first,
Hmm.
or things like that? If you hear an EVP, are you making sure that, it wasn't one of your investigators speaking?
Right.
Because I mean, we've done
Oh yeah,
that.
100%.
We'll hear it and be like, oh my God, it's an EVP, and then someone else will listen and be like, no, that's me. Oh, okay.
Hmm.
I remember saying that. All right, well, never mind.
Right.
Because you have to catch each other, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that helps determine credibility.
Yeah. Now, we've kind of given some of our thoughts on this, but you know, this question of alphabet soup, there are some people, there is a particular book that will remain unnamed.
Yeah, I'm not naming that
I'm
because
not
I
going to
really
name the
didn't
book
like
because
it.
I really didn't like it. If you are really curious, please direct message us. I will send you the title of this book. I don't recommend the book. But it's sort of about the culture of ghost hunting. It's supposed to be. It's
It's supposed to
intended
be.
to be about the culture of ghost hunting. I don't think it does a particularly good job. But one
It's
of
also
the
supposed to
things,
be scientific, and as someone who's a scientist, I have
yeah,
issues with
yeah,
that.
we have lots of feelings about this book. We could record multiple episodes, but we don't want to platform a book that we don't think is fair to
Right,
paranormal investigators.
right.
I think that's the piece is, we understand as academics the perceptions that people have of paranormal investigators. We also, as paranormal investigators, understand that dynamic, that relationship between those two groups of people is complicated. And this book really disparages that. And one of the things that they really point to, or the author really points to in this book, is that like if you are credentialed, then suddenly you are amazingly scientific, all of your stuff is credible. And I just, like you said, it can be like totally random, your credentials. I mean, you could have a master's degree in English or whatever, and that doesn't like necessarily say anything about whether or not you're a good investigator.
Right.
For us, we're anthropologists. We look at this from an anthropological lens, so we use that in our, approach to investigating. But that isn't always the case. If you have
Right.
someone who's like, has a PhD in physics and they study UFOs, okay, I really do care about their opinion on
Well,
UFOs
100%.
because like
An astrophysicist who's telling me what's in space,
I'm gonna listen. As much as we have become anti-intellectual in this country, I do care about credentials, and that is not entirely self-serving, I promise. But I think the other thing too is like, like you said, a lot of this, particularly with the equipment, but also not even just the equipment, but like the locations that, like if you go and look to investigate places like Waverly or places like the Myrtles or
Fort Mifflin.
Fort Mifflin,
Leave
like
one in
any,
Pennsylvania.
yeah, that's close. Yeah, I mean, or Eastern State Pen, which is
Yeah.
down in Philly too. You know, it costs money to get into these places. It varies in terms of cost, but many of them are not super affordable. And we understand that like running those big, buildings that are all falling apart for the most part, you got to collect some money to be able to upkeep for those buildings. So we
And
get it.
hang on, if you're one of those people who runs one of those buildings, if you don't have a working 21st century bathroom, charge us a little more and put one
So
in.
you can get one.
Yeah, just to throw that in there.
Yes, yeah. We will not name any names because some of those places we love, even though they have porta potties. But I think, what it comes down to for me is like our hobbies should ask a lot more of us than just our money, and I think we should be really careful as paranormal investigators and be really cognizant of that bias that we have. Like someone who shows up just with a flashlight and a voice recorder, or not even a flashlight and a voice recorder, just shows up with their cell phone,
With their phone,
which
because you have everything in it.
is a voice recorder and a
Yeah.
flashlight under the right circumstances. Um, I think we should be careful to assume that like that person is less credible and is less of a, is not as good of an investigator.
Yeah, they just might not have as much money.
Right. And so they may be better, and so because I sometimes get annoyed with all the equipment. I'm like, I would like to just go back to my flashlight and my voice recorder and be done.
And sometimes we do.
Right.
Sometimes we just use that. And actually, when we go into private homes, we really bring very little equipment.
Right, right. And so I think that's, an important piece to remember because when paranormal investigators get together, whether it's at a convention or wherever, there is this tendency to be like talking about the newest, coolest, thing that's for sale or, this new thing. I mean, there's like a whole kind of subset of people in the paranormal world that kind of build their own tech and do that kind of thing, which is cool. Like,
so cool. I'd
super
love to
cool.
be able to do it.
I wish Radio Shack still existed for all of you because, like, I feel like your jobs would be easier if Radio Shack was still around. But no, I think, we should be careful not to assume that those things are like, oh, well, you've spent all this money. Of course you're credible. And then I think the other thing that we kind of touched on a little bit is, the importance of having critical thought. Saying, I'm not sure what that is before we assume that some sort of phenomena that happened while you're at a location is paranormal. Not taking everything immediately as, oh, that's evidence of the paranormal. Just taking that second to think, is
What
that
else
knock on the
could it
wall?
be?
What else could this be, right? Because like we said, in our second episode, we're talking about the Sally house, and it's like we investigated there a lot, and we figured out that when you flush the toilet, a pipe knocks in the wall.
Right.
So,
And we're not plumbers.
And we're not plumbers. Yeah, exactly. You do not need to work for Roto-Rooter to be able to figure that out. And so I think, that's a really important piece here is like, because that runs through a lot of this, is like, even if you're using a bunch of tech, or how critically are you using it? If you're
And critical thought does not equal alphabet soup after
God, no, absolutely not.
And that
No.
that is one thing that book we mentioned
assumes
is that because you've gone to school for a long time, which also, by the way, requires a ton of money.
It does. It does. You are.
That means that you're the only one. Now, I will say, going to grad school, you do learn critical thought, but you can learn it in other ways too.
And just because you go to grad school doesn't mean you learn critical thought either.
Well, that's true.
So
a lot of things.
I know many of those people.
So it's bothersome as someone who is credentialed to have people say things about those credentials when they don't fully understand what they mean. It depends on the field of study you're in. It depends if you use that in your investigation at all.
Right.
So it's frustrating that can be called credibility because I don't think it should determine your credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And neither should, and this we didn't mention, but your presence in the media determine that either.
Yeah.
You know what? Anybody can put together a damn website.
Oh, 100%.
Well, except me apparently because I really suck. But
because you're old enough to remember when you had to do it like DIY with HTML and stuff. So
I learned how to do it using HTML and Dreamweaver, and this was a minute ago, and I could do that then.
With the Dreamweaver.
That's all right. But but back then I actually used to enjoy trying to do that, and I put together some websites. But then I stopped and decided I really didn't want to be in social media and the web and all of that. And
because for some people that's a conscious choice.
Yes.
There are a lot of folks who do investigation or paranormal investigation that are not, the goal is not to get a TV show.
Right.
And now it's so easy to enter the media. I mean, look at us. We're on a podcast.
Right.
Like, we're just two idiots sitting here talking to a microphone. So, it's very easy to be in the media in some way now.
But some of us, and myself included, I avoided it, for a long time.
Right.
And you somehow convinced me to do this. So,
well, here we are. Hey, man, people are listening. So, So I think that's kind of a big picture kind of overview of like what we mean when we're talking about a ghost hunter and what we mean in a paranormal investigator and what that means within that community, right?
Right.
Because I think that's important. We're going to keep saying this over and over again because we clearly don't want to piss off the people who are ghost hunters and paranormal investigators because
Oh, no, no,
we
no,
want you to
no.
listen. But we're going to keep, I think, I want to keep coming back to, you know, a lot of this is not our own personal opinions about this. It's from, as anthropologists, being in that space and learning about it as a community of people, like we would learn about any other community that we're in.
And to be perfectly honest, we're going to use the terms ghost hunter and paranormal investigator
Interchangeably.
interchangeably,
Yes.
even though we just talked about what the differences are.
Yep.
Because colloquially,
They are kind of used that way.
they are kind of used that way.
Mhm.
But we like to make that differentiation out front as anthropologists because we have to define everything.
Yes, we
But also to show that there are different schools of thought on sort of how to
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
And again, I don't care what you call yourself.
Mhm. I don't either. No, I really
It
don't.
doesn't matter.
As long as you're listening, you can call yourself whatever you want.
That's right.
So, is ghost hunting scientific, Chris?
No.
No. All right. Well, that settles that. Moving on.
Sorry, moving on. Well, no, the reason I say that.
Yes, because you just read a quote from Taps, who we love, that said
Yeah,
we use the scientific method.
And that's the thing, we talk about all these people in the media, and we do have a tremendous respect for Taps, and particularly what they did for paranormal investigation in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think they did more probably to legitimize paranormal research than maybe any other group.
Right. And
I think.
and they're plumbers.
And it has had staying power. I think that's the thing about ghost hunters is like you can look back through the history of paranormal research, and I don't know that there's any group of people or any one individual that you can point to that has not only legitimized some of this, but that what they did has had that staying power.
Right.
The ghost hunter system.
Right. And the reason I said they're plumbers is they're not academics. We're back to the alphabet soup.
Yes.
And yet the method that they use, they refer to it as a more scientific method. The reason I say it's not is because you can't use the scientific method to study the paranormal. The scientific method is a very specific thing that we use. And if you look at the standard of it, you're in a lab. Okay, so that just takes everything out the window, like throw it all out because you're never in a lab.
Now, sometimes there are some people who have attempted to do research in labs regarding the paranormal.
Yeah, it doesn't work very well.
But it's not the same, right? Because so much of doing paranormal research is place-based.
Right.
And like, okay, if the lab is haunted,
hey,
fine.
maybe your lab is haunted.
Maybe
I don't know.
And I would love to know about that. Please DM us about this.
Yeah, because I will investigate that lab.
Yes, I will be there in a heartbeat. But so much about doing this work is place-based, and those places are not as controlled, are never as controlled as a lab environment.
Right. So first off, you're supposed to be in a lab. So when you do the scientific method, you ask a question based on some observation, right? That's what you're doing. Yep. You're doing some background research, you're forming a hypothesis, you also form a null hypothesis. You test it, you analyze it, you draw a conclusion, you reject or you fail to reject the null. Then you're sharing results. For many of us, this also involves hypothesis testing in statistics, which again, this is a very specific method. And so you have your null and your alternative hypotheses, you're determining a significance level, your alpha. You select the appropriate statistical test, you collect the data, you clean it, you calculate your test statistic, you get a p-value. P-values are your friend.
And nobody's doing this in the paranormal.
No. You compare your p-value to your alpha, you make a decision about failing to reject or rejecting, and you're interpreting. So this is a very specific method. You can't do this when you're sitting in the Sally house.
No.
Because it is not a controlled environment.
Right. And that's the key piece here. Like that's where this all falls apart. Yeah. And I think the problem.
Well, and the fact that you can't. And when you're trying to investigate the paranormal, you're actually testing multiple things at once, which is just not.
Yes, exactly. Right. Like confounders are your friend when it comes to the paranormal.
Yeah.
I think this tricky part here is like, so we talked about establishing credibility within the community of paranormal research. I think I get the sense that this sort of attempt to claim a scientific approach is an attempt to court favor with credentialed scientists
Sure.
and to be taken seriously.
But it actually backfires.
Right, because
Because
when
they're all people like me who are going to
have
fight the
that,
scientific
yes.
method.
And I think the other piece that's tricky about this is like most people, and I'm someone who like the last time I took a class where I talked about where I learned about the scientific method, I was a freshman in undergrad. Okay.
Wow.
And for a lot of people, that's the last time they
Yeah.
learned about quote unquote the scientific method.
Yeah.
And we can think about back to our high school biology classes, how boiled down that is now that we have all of this knowledge about how to do academic research,
Right.
right? It's like, oh, well, that's like the cliff notes of the cliff
Right.
notes,
Right.
And so our overwhelming lack of understanding about science and how academic research actually happens hurts us here, which is a bummer for us. Because, like, we
Right.
look at this and we're like, there is lots of cool stuff you could do and say about what you're doing that actually legitimizes it. But saying you're using the scientific method is not on that list.
Right. You're not truly conducting an experiment.
Right.
An experiment is very controlled. It's about predicting things by changing conditions. And you're not doing that when you have this very uncontrolled environment. And so I think talking instead about pieces of science and scientific method that we can use in investigation, I think that's a better way to think about it, a better way to talk about it, and certainly a better way to converse with scientists who
Right.
are going to just say, no.
You're not doing science.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, we can talk about quasi experiments and naturalistic experiments. Paranormal investigation doesn't do any of that.
Mm-hmm.
Not really.
Right.
But there are some things that you can absolutely use, and that's what I think we should talk more about is
Mm-hmm.
how can we make this more scientific based on some of the things that we can use
Right.
from science. And one of those is observational work.
Mm-hmm.
So, experiments are one thing.
But there are
Observational research.
way more ways to do research
Yeah.
than just doing experiments. Like, I don't do experiments. I've never done experiments in my professional life.
I run clinical trials, so you could,
So
you can
you
make
could
some
squint
arguments.
at it like
Yeah.
one of those, weird seeing eye picture things.
So fun. But I definitely use hypothesis testing.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
ad nauseum. So.
Yes. But any of my own personal stuff, I have never once done an experiment, not one time.
So let's talk about observational study.
Mhm.
So that it doesn't just mean I looked at something.
No, it can.
Sure.
I looked at a thing and watched what it did. Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot more to observational research.
Mm-hmm.
It's about critical thought.
Yes.
It's about observing all aspects of something. You can't look at something in isolation.
Yeah.
So you're observing kind of what's going on in the environment around it and things like that. So, do you want to? I'm talking a lot.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, this is your piece, man. I'm gonna let you cook, Chris, okay? But no, so when we think about, for example, Jane Goodall, rest in peace.
Yeah. That's a loss.
It is a loss. As anthropologists and as humans on this planet, that is a loss. You know, she didn't do experimental research, or she didn't get famous for doing experimental research, right? What she was doing was groundbreaking, don't get me wrong, but she was hanging out in the jungle, naming chimps and watching what they did.
She was doing observational research in a really,
research.
really scientific, well done way.
Right. And that's how primatologists and other, animal behaviorists do research like that. And so I think, for me, like we come back to, like, as anthropologists, we do, participant observation. We go hang out with the people who do the thing while we're doing the thing with them to learn about the thing, whatever that thing is. I've said thing like 16 times, but you get the point, right? It's like, we talked about in the first episode, how we learn about different types during different aspects of the paranormal from going out and doing it. And understanding, like, all of the things that we're talking about now about the culture of ghost hunting come from those experiences of us going out and doing the paranormal research and being in those communities and being in those spaces and talking to people. And so not only is it like a personal interest of ours, but it's as a scientific sort of interest, we're curious about what that, what that culture is, right? And so that's another kind of observational study. And so, there's a systematic way to do observation that I think is the piece that people often don't understand.
And yet they're actually doing it in some cases.
Right.
In some cases, when they're talking about, experiments, they're not really talking about that. They're talking
Right.
about doing some observations.
Right. Like, I mean, I don't want to talk smack on, like, what's the one show where they always tried to, like, do a thing to trap a ghost. I can't remember the name
Was
of that
that
show.
Ghost Asylum?
Maybe
I'm gonna look it up.
Ghost. No, maybe I don't know. But all that to say that, like, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that thing. I mean, I forget what show it was that put a fog machine in the gas chamber, or in the is it the gas chamber at Missouri State Pen?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I forget who that was, but we watched that episode, and I was like, I have a fog machine.
Ghost Asylum.
Okay, it was Ghost
I
Asylum.
actually liked that show.
Yeah, I liked that show a lot.
I really liked that show. It was unique.
Yes, it was different, right?
Yeah.
But that's not to say, like, we see someone going to Missouri State Pen, putting a fog machine in the gas chamber, and we're like, oh, that's hokey and not experimental, because I watched that and said, I have a fog machine and we're going to Missouri State Pen in a couple months. We should bring it. And we did, and weird stuff happened.
Yeah.
What can I make of that? I don't know. But I'm not, we're not using the scientific method in the way that I think academic researchers who use it every day do. And I think that's, again, I think that's that's part of the problem, or part of the problem is not a lot of people really understand academic research. And if you want to be taken seriously by academics who do that, I think step one needs to not be making this sort of call to authority of, oh, well, I'm using the scientific method, but to actually understand what people who do academic research do, and
Right.
what the diversity of what that can look like. Because I think a lot of people have this assumption about academic research being, we're all wearing lab coats and we're in a lab and stuff. And I, for one, haven't worn a lab coat since freshman year biology. So
It's been more recent for me, but it's still been a minute. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't done lab research
Yeah.
in quite a while.
And so
Really since grad school. So yeah.
So it's not science, but that's not bad.
Right. It's not the scientific method.
Yes.
But it is rigorous academic type research, scientific research, just not the scientific method. And again, the idea of calling something an experiment, it really, I don't
that means something
Yeah.
to people who do experimental research.
And so when someone looks at what you're doing in a paranormal setting, in a haunted house, whatever, they're going to immediately critique the fact that it is so uncontrolled.
Right. Right.
And
that's not to say that, like, and I think all of this is to say that we want academics to take this more seriously.
Yes,
we wouldn't be
100%
sitting
do.
in front of this microphone if we didn't. And so we say all of this to say to people who want it to also share that, and are, going out and investigating and collecting evidence and things, to pay attention to the language that you use.
Right. And even, okay,
which
you
is
can call
annoying.
it field experimentation. Let's not even go to yes, you can go out in the field and do. Just don't use those terms. Just instead talk about trying to rigorously examine something.
Right. We did a thing and we controlled what we could control.
Right. And
this is what we got.
As much as you can, I think, is great.
And like being very open about that. I think that, like, that to me, like, if someone comes up to me and says, I got this evidence and we ruled out this, and this.
And I love that.
I'm like, oh, sweet. Suddenly I'm taking this much more serious.
So you tried to disprove, and that,
Right.
using that idea from the scientific method of disproving things, I think is the key of what you can take from the scientific method. So if a door opens by itself, let's try to make it happen. Let's try to do that. Let's see if we can change the environmental conditions in some way. But recognizing that you're not starting at the exact same conditions to begin with,
Right.
in which that door opened. Because you can't.
The humidity could be different. The barometric pressure could be different.
Right.
The air conditioning could be on or it could be off. The heat could be on.
So there's all of these different things. So you do what you can to control, and then you try to change things and see if you can make it happen. And I think using that piece from the scientific method is perfect. But again, it's not an experiment.
No.
I
think we get tripped up on, like, the colloquial usage of stuff, of terms, versus the, like, sort of official academic use. And I think that's the piece here that's, like, really important to understand.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, if you use the terms however you want in colloquialism.
Sure.
What we're talking about is if you are trying to get academics to take you seriously and get the field of paranormal investigation to be taken more seriously from credentialed people or, higher education
Whoever,
or the
yeah.
academe, whatever, then using the appropriate terminology is really important. And that's what's going to help you to become more legitimate in the eyes of science. Um, I do want to talk a little bit about naturalistic experiments. I still think it's kind of tenuous, but you know, when we as investigators send multiple groups into the same location, we could be doing a naturalistic experiment. So in a naturalistic experiment, you look at something that happened and you see how different people respond to it and try to understand what's going on. Um, that's one way to do it. So if we go to the same location as another group, we can see do we get the same kinds of evidence? And that's one thing that we do in paranormal investigation all the time. We compare,
My fog machine example.
the fog machine
Perfect
example,
example.
perfect
Yep.
example. So, if we do the same kinds of things, do we get similar responses? If we do something a little bit different, do we get a different response? And you see it even when you watch these TV shows when someone says, well, the homeowner is saying that they experienced this. Well, are we going to experience that?
Yep.
You're trying to see if the same thing is repeatable, which is, of course, a tenet within science.
Yep.
And so I think about this one piece of evidence we captured. We were at the Crescent Hotel. What is that, Missouri?
Eureka Springs.
Eureka
Arkansas.
Springs. Oh, that's Arkansas.
Arkansas.
Yeah.
Just across the border.
Yeah, anyway. So
Southern Missouri. Really southern Missouri.
really southern Missouri, Arkansas.
We love Missouri.
The Crescent Hotel, when Taps went there on Ghost Hunters, the original show, they caught this really cool piece of evidence on their thermal, where you kind of see a person standing there and there's like a number on what looks like the arm. And they really said, this is one of the best pieces of evidence we've ever caught. We love it. They talk about it in their books too. Like they're really excited about this piece of evidence. When we went there, we caught the same thing in the same location. And let me just tell you how excited we got because we caught the same thing as Taps, first of all.
Yeah. That's the important part. It's like we got what Taps got.
But then we brought it to the owners of the Crescent Hotel, and for a long time, I don't know if it's still there because I haven't been there in a long time, but they had Taps's thermal image and our thermal image next to each other up on the wall. And that was really cool because that felt like we actually replicated something and we were doing some kind of naturalistic type of experiment. So, we can do some of these kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to say that in all of this, it's about, we want this stuff to be taken seriously. I know I've said this already, but I want to reiterate, we want this to be taken seriously. And so that's where we come at from this, it's like, we're not finger wagging and saying like, oh no, you don't do science.
Not at all.
We're like, well, no, none of us do. And maybe if we can impart some of our experiences as academic researchers to you so that, that the way that you're received, because I think that's the problem is I think there's this perception among a lot of paranormal researchers that they're just written off by academics just because they're interested in the paranormal. Which in some cases
that's true.
In some cases that is absolutely true. But I think there are a lot more sympathetic people in higher ed and that are credentialed or whatever that are more open to studying this stuff. I mean, there are like Jeff Kripal and Diana Pasulka, and like there are all these people that are in endowed professorships that are into this stuff. And so I think being careful about the way that you communicate and understanding what it is that you actually do, and I think we love ghost hunters, but I think they do their use of the idea that they were doing something scientific. I think has like kind of made people go, oh, well, I whipped out the K2 meter, and so I'm doing stuff that's scientific too. And it's like,
and the scientific piece of what they were doing and still do is trying to offer alternative explanations first.
Yes.
It's that critical piece.
Yes.
And so that I think is what we should all hone in on it and kind of say, like, let's be critical. Let's look at things and try to figure out if there's other things that could be causing something, because then what you're left with might be paranormal. You still don't know.
Yeah, you still don't know. Yeah.
But that, changing the language a little bit might help us to bring this back
Mhm.
into the academic
Yeah.
sphere.
Yeah. So now that we've talked a lot about science,
Let's talk about tech.
well, and why should we talk about tech? Well, because that is, I think, one of the ways, like I just said, that is one of the ways that I think people, there is this assumption that if you're using tech, you are scientific. And I can understand that.
Yeah, but let's look at the tech first.
Well, yeah, yeah, and I think, I think tech is really useful with the paranormal, particularly because I can't see EMF fields. EVPs by definition you can't hear in the moment. And so for some of the types of evidence that are the most popular pieces of evidence, the tech is actually necessary. It's not necessarily about, well, you look super scientific or not, but the pieces of evidence that you want to, that people are most interested in collecting, whether it's, full body apparition on video, like, well, if I see a full body apparition, I tell you about it, it's much less impactful than if I can pull out my phone and say, look at this video that I got.
Right.
Um, and
Except you
so
might have created it with AI.
well, yeah, yeah,
AI has
yeah,
changed this world in
yeah,
ways I can't even
yeah.
begin.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm not even gonna get started on AI. But so all of that's to say, I think I think it's important to think about, what tech is being used for in a paranormal investigation. And in my opinion, it's used to sort of verify and or supplement your own experience of being in the space, right? And to collect those pieces of data. And so wanted to talk about like two really big ones that are really popular and also that there's been a decent amount of research done
yeah,
on
yeah.
them. So first and foremost, EMF or electromagnetic fields, there is this idea within the paranormal community that, you know, spirits or, entities can interact with or manipulate electromagnetic fields. And so you see this in a lot of the equipment that's really popular. So K2 meters for one, just standard run-of-the-mill EMF meters, REM pods, MEL meters, all of them have this EMF, either, they
Some
put
sort
off
of
an EMF
feature with,
field,
yeah.
right, or they, can detect changes in EMF. And interestingly, there's some kind of cool research that's not that old,
Mhm.
that went and tested this, and found that there were higher EMF levels, and not just levels, but numbers of spikes associated in purportedly haunted locations where there was widespread belief in ghosts rather than just average run-of-the-mill like Walmart parking lots or whatever it is. And so
Hey,
we're gonna put
Walmart parking
those.
lots are
They're
paranormal.
paranormal, but in a different way.
Yeah.
In a very different way. But so we'll put those in the show notes. I'm not gonna belabor the point. But we'll put a couple. There's like 3 citations in the show notes that
And,
you
and
can go
incidentally, if you're one of the
read.
people who did one of those studies,
Dude, we want to talk to you
we
for a
want to
bit.
talk to you. We really want you to come on the podcast.
So bad, so bad. And then the other one that I want to talk about because it's really popular, but also because it has a really interesting connection to anthropology that I didn't know until recently.
Mm.
Is electronic voice phenomena. So the idea that recording devices can pick up voices from entities that we can't hear in the moment with our own ears. Otherwise, it would be a disembodied voice or a disembodied sound of some variety. And the first reported case of an EVP was actually caught by an ethnographer whose name is Valdemar Bagris. And he was a Russian ethnographer who caught an EVP on a phonograph recording in 1901.
Yeah.
So he was observing a shamanic ritual in Siberia. He actually is like one of the fathers of Siberian ethnography.
And it was a spirit conjuring ritual
Yes,
specifically,
yes,
which is
yeah,
important
specifically,
to
yeah,
kind of think
yeah.
about.
And that recording is our first example that we have of an EVP. And it is available online. Again, we'll put a link in the show notes so you can go listen to it. That recording is wild. We listened to it when we were planning this episode, and we had to read the description of what we were supposed to be hearing multiple times. And not because it was so hard to hear. But because the EVP was so clear, we because the EVP was so clear, we actually thought that we were hearing someone who was there, like
Right,
a
right.
corporeal person
So we
that
were like,
was
well,
speaking.
where's the EVP? Because here's a person talking.
And no, that was the
That was the
EVP.
EVP.
The sound you hear in the background is actually this ritual that he's observing, and the crystal clear audio that you hear on top of it is actually the EVP.
So
Um,
maybe we need to use phonographs.
so maybe we need to pull an Alexander Graham Bell and like go super old school, or not Alexander Graham Bell, Edison.
Edison.
I don't know. But
You're an
anyway,
anthropologist, not a
hey,
historian.
that's right. I'm not a historian. You got it. The only History Channel I'm watching is Ancient Aliens. So,
Yeah, definitely.
which is the only History Channel to watch anymore, right? But anyway, so the other thing about EVPs, so that happens in 1901. EVPs don't really become super popular. I mean, they're present in the spiritualist movement without a doubt, but they first start to be seriously studied in the 1950s. There's a guy by the name of Konstantin Radiv that creates the procedures for an EVP session that we would recognize today in the 1970s. He writes a book called Breakthrough: An Amazing Experience in Electronic Communication with the Dead. I will have you know that if you want a physical copy of that, it's costing you over $100, which is wild. But
Wow,
the PDF is available online at archive.org, and the link is in the show notes.
that sounds
So
better.
you can read, yes, you can read the whole book for free.
Back to that whole, our hobbies should not be.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Unless you're like obsessed with books like me and you're like on the hunt for a decently priced copy. But so if you have one, let me know. But so he basically creates the procedures that we would think of when you think of an EVP session. So you go into a location, you start asking questions, you give an entity a moment to respond. You maybe have other pieces of equipment that they can interact with to give you indications of positive or negative answers, things like that. And he really creates that. And the other thing that's really important is, he kind of used a technique that's similar to spirit boxes, but somewhat different. So when you use a spirit box today, if you just go buy one from Ghost Stop or wherever, it's going to rifle through all of the frequencies at a specific rate. The technique that he used was that they would ask the spirits to communicate which specific frequency they wanted them to stop on with this radio. And then the idea was that the spirits are then able to manipulate those frequencies to communicate. Um,
So they
but
asked for more specific things in those early.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wasn't this like we're just gonna hope. And there's some. I did some reading on this. There's a lot of sort of um, disagreement about the way that spirit boxes work, and this is kind of where some of that comes from. And so there is this assumption that like for a lot of folks who use spirit boxes now, the idea is they can pull words out of those different frequencies rather than they're manipulating the frequencies to then make sound themselves. And so that comes out of a lot of this research that he was doing. But I think the most important piece for understanding this guy in particular is that he gives us the classification system for EVPs that we use today. And you'll hear people talk about this, they'll talk about a class A EVP, class B EVP. This guy came up with that. And so class A, or he calls them groups.
I'm glad he doesn't call them, we don't call them groups anymore. That feels like
It feels weird. Yeah, I just don't like it. Yeah, it just like doesn't sound
strep A, strep B. Sorry, had to go medical.
And so he talks about Group A or Class A EVPs are the clearest. They can be heard by any listener. So, for example, our Valdemar Bogarus's EVP
It's
definitely a Class A, no question at all. Group Bs are less clear, but can be heard by trained listeners. And he also puts a lot of stock in this idea that to be a good analyst for EVPs is you have to actually spend a lot of time doing it, which I agree with.
100% agree with that.
And I was really shocked to read that, kind of the first attempt to really legitimize EVPs, that's one of the things that comes out of it is that like you can't just give this to anyone and hope that they're going to get all of the EVPs, which we talk about all the time.
Right.
But knowing that it came from that is kind of.
There are certain people who really, I mean, and some of it's from repetition, and some of it is just some people just have this really great ability to pick out
sounds. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Some of us are not as good at it, and I'll include myself in that. I'm
played drums for a while, and our ears suck now.
So some people just are very, very good at figuring out EVPs, and And I get somewhat annoyed when someone says, well, it's not a real EVP if other people would interpret it differently. No, that's not
That's not
true.
true. Yeah.
It's still an EVP. It might not be as clear.
Right.
And
And
that's
there
when
may be some disagreement about what it's saying, but
and that's when it's good to bring in people who really kind of specialize in this
Mhm.
to help you figure out what
Yep.
it's saying.
Yep. And then there's group C's, and these are just the hardest to distinguish. So there's, something there,
They're
but
also the most
we're
common.
not sure what it is. I was just about to say, and those are the ones you get all the time.
Yeah.
You get a group A EVP or a class A, now I'm saying group. You get a class A EVP. I mean, those are like the holy grail. You get them every once in a while, but you don't get them that often. A lot of the times you get group Bs and group Cs. And that's just, I think, the nature of the phenomena.
And the A's that we've gotten, the class A's that
Mhm.
we've gotten, they've all been really nasty.
Dude, they really are. Usually if you get a group A or class A, they are, there are instances where you're at a location and whatever you're working with is particularly nasty.
Yeah.
And that's when you get those super crystal clear ones. And yeah, it's weird.
It's weird, but those are,
It's weird.
and maybe it has to do with, strong feelings. If you have something that has strong
Maybe.
feelings,
Yeah,
but
maybe.
it's never a real positive one, at least in our experience.
No, yeah, it's never like, oh, good work, bro. That's a really
Yeah.
nice K2 meter you got. Like, it's never that.
Other
Yeah.
people are getting some pretty cool ones, but
Yeah.
ours always seem to be like, F you.
Yeah, pretty much.
Get out.
Yeah, get out, get down. And yeah, we don't take it personally sometimes.
Well, sometimes.
Sometimes. And then I think the other piece that's kind of the flip side of this tech coin is this use of other paranormal phenomena as a means to prove the existence of
Right. So
ghosts.
using psychic abilities.
Psychics is the big one here, right?
If someone walks into a room and they claim to have abilities, I can't say whether they do or not because I
Right.
don't,
No,
whoever. So
because I can't prove it.
right. And that's the problem.
Just
So
the
if someone
problem.
walks into a room and says, I'm a medium and I see three dead people standing there, how am I proving that? I'm not saying I don't believe them
Right.
because I might.
Right.
And I think there are people who have different abilities than others, but I don't think everybody who claims to have them has the same ones or even has any. I mean, some people like attention.
Yep.
But there are some people with very legitimate abilities out there. But how do you prove it?
Right.
If someone is telling me, again, like that there's three ghosts standing there, or, that there's a portal. How do I know this? How do I
Until we
prove
all
this?
walk through that portal together. I don't know.
So I really struggle with the idea that we can use that phenomenon to prove or
Yeah.
disprove.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you should never use those abilities if you have
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
I'm just saying that if you're doing something where you're trying to bring credibility into the field, proving something using another paranormal phenomenon,
Another unproven phenomenon.
right? It doesn't bring credibility. And so again, if you have abilities, use them.
Right, right. Because why do you care what we're saying?
Right.
We're
But
just too-
it's a tough one because I do think there are people who are experiencing things very
Yeah,
differently.
for sure.
But I can't take a picture of it. I can't prove it. And
Right.
maybe I feel better about it if it's maybe corroborated with other things. But I always feel better about evidence when it's corroborated.
Yeah, regardless of the type of
So,
evidence.
for example, if you're doing an EVP session and you're getting responses, and at the same time, your flashlight's turning on and your K2's going off, and and it seems to all
That
work together.
triangulation is key. Yeah.
I really, to me, that's more believable
Mhm.
than any one thing in particular.
Yeah.
So, if a psychic walks into a room and starts talking about, well, there's an entity sitting on the bed right now, and then I put a REM pod down and it's going off, maybe
Immediately
I'm kind of like, oh,
okay,
that's
that's
interesting.
different. Yeah.
You might be really, really good.
Yeah, you might be on something. Okay. Yep.
So yeah, again, using multiple pieces of equipment, multiple tech, I think is great.
Yeah. Let's move away from tech. Let's move away from
Tech.
quote unquote science.
Unless we want to talk about some of the other kinds of tech that are out there. And you talked about some of the
Oh, the like main ones. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, we didn't really talk about that. I mean, I think there is like this overabundance, in my opinion. This is my own personal take. There is an overabundance of equipment to be used
Yeah,
in
there is.
the paranormal. Like
Definitely.
when I started doing this, there was some new stuff, but it was pretty much the standard stuff that I ran down, the list I ran down, EMF meters, K2s, like that kind of stuff. Now, you've got trigger objects that have REM pods built in or whole millimeters built into them. And like that's kind of a thing now. And
Yeah.
I come back to just like I shouldn't feel like I need to buy all of the
And
things.
all of the different communication
Yeah.
devices that are out there. There's a ton of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, one of my favorite pieces of equipment, I'm making quotes with my fingers, um, is cat balls.
Yeah, yeah,
The little
yeah,
cat
people really
toys.
like using those now. Yeah, that's really
Um,
common now.
and, why not?
Yeah, because they have a little light in them and they light
Yeah.
up when they move. And.
But, I mean, there's tons of different pieces of equipment out there now. And, to me, if you scale it back
Hmm.
and go back to some of these simpler pieces of equipment, I feel like what that does is take some of the confounding factors away. So it's back to that trying to control
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, and I think like there's a sense, and we've kind of already said this, but that like to be a good investigator means you have to have all the equipment. And I
Right.
think we should pause and
Get the cat balls because they're like real cheap.
well, yeah, get the cat. Well, sure, fine. Pick those up while you're getting cat litter at Walmart or wherever. But I think, I think we should pause and focus more on being good investigators
Yes.
first
Yes.
instead of being like, let me acquire all of this tech and then I will be a good investigator.
Right. Another piece of the culture of ghost hunting is why are people going into these locations? What are they trying to do as they go into these locations? And we're talking very much about investigators, people who
Yeah.
are trying to figure things out, people who are trying to legitimize. But there's other things going on. And so I think I'd just like to mention there's people who want to go in and just document what they find. And so
Hmm.
it's not about doing an experiment or quasi experiment or whatever.
Hmm.
It's just about documenting. Can I get any evidence whatsoever
Hmm.
of what's going on here? And I think it's valid.
Hmm.
It's just a different type of person who's doing this. And then there's the people who really are not interested in documenting or investigating. They just want to cleanse.
Hmm.
They just want to get rid of whatever happens to be there. And I think that's a really different type of person. I don't think that's someone who's really a paranormal investigator if they're just going in and doing that kind of thing. Um, Sometimes you're talking about, excuse me, you're talking about someone who's really religious.
Yeah.
And so they want to go in and, say a mass for people, or maybe it's not a mass, but move people on. People
Burn
talk
some
about,
sage.
that,
Go into the light.
but yes, I mean, people talk about,
Go into
moving.
the light, Carolyn.
Okay, great movie, but
Yes, excellent.
um, the idea that there's something stuck here, we want to help it move on.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I
No,
actually,
not necessarily.
if
No.
there is something stuck needing to move on, I think helping
I will say,
can be a
like,
good thing.
it could be a good thing. I will say to just offer a contrasting opinion that, like, who gets to decide, like, if they need to move on?
Well, in my opinion,
You know?
it's if something's asking you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Like, it's like you can't
Yeah.
just show up and be like, well, here's your eviction notice, my guy. Like, unless they're being,
Well,
not great,
what if they're
but
messing with,
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's different. But, like, I just feel like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like if you're going to the Sally house and trying to move Sally on, which
Well, Sally's not there, so.
I don't think Sally's there, but even if she was, that's weird to me.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, sorry.
But yeah, I mean, so, and I, again, if something's asking you to move it on, and I do believe that there are legitimate communications that
Mm.
showcase that, that's one thing. But there are people who literally just go to haunted locations and just try to cleanse them.
Right.
And that's a very different type of thing. That's not a paranormal investigator, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of a divide within the field.
Mhm.
Do you go in, do you just document? Do you move things on? Do you cleanse?
Mhm.
What do you do with what you find there?
Mhm.
If you find something that you believe is demonic, do you just run screaming? Which seems to be a common thing.
Call a priest.
Call a priest, yeah. And they'll probably not respond to you.
Nah.
Well, unless you're cat.
That's right. That's right.
I feel the need to talk about the gender divide
Hmm.
that is really, really apparent when you look at this world. First of all, it is exceptionally male dominated, particularly in the public.
Yes.
Because I actually as we've talked with a lot of people who have done this over the years, there are a lot more women out there
Oh
who
yeah, you
do
go to a
this.
paranormal conference, like
It's
yeah,
actually mostly
yeah,
women.
yeah.
And, when we've taken students and, we're professors in our day job. So, you know, when we take students out to do
Mhm.
this or have students in class who are interested in this, it is actually very female dominated.
Mhm.
But if you look at what's out there on TV and out in the media, it's much more male dominated. I will say it has changed slightly. I'm seeing a little bit
It's
more.
gotten better. Yeah, we gotta like
Um,
give credit to people like Amy Bruni and
sure, sure.
like people who are really, women who are doing like really
And
cool
I
things.
particularly like Amy Bruni because of her approach.
Yes. Yes.
And that actually brings up the idea of, what is a woman in the paranormal world supposed to look like? And there are some stereotypes that I
There is a type.
really, really hate.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to let you talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, if you go and watch anything on any paranormal media except for Kindred Spirits and anything that Amy Bruni is on, please, Amy, come on this podcast. We love you. There is a type, right? The women that are in a lot of paranormal media are sort of expected to look a certain way. It's a sort of stereotypical goth girl vibe. Purple hair may or may not be included.
Hey, I had purple hair for a
Yeah,
while.
you did. You fit part of this stereotype for a hot second.
I actually
But
liked
the
purple.
big thing is like this association with women who are in the paranormal having some form of psychic abilities and using them during investigations. And that is like, if you watch a lot of paranormal media, the women on those shows are frequently that they're pigeonholed into that sort of persona, right? Um, and it's weird, frankly, in our opinion. But if you dig into it, it actually makes a little bit of sense if you look at the history of paranormal investigation. So if we go all the way back to the Victorian period, the turn of the 20th century, there's this spiritual movement called the Spiritualist movement. And it became popular with, seances and spirit photography. If you've seen the famous picture of Mary Todd Lincoln with the supposed ghost of Abraham Lincoln standing behind her, that is from this period. And so any of the pictures of like ectoplasm that you've seen that are from the Victorian period come out of this movement. And a lot of the things that we associate with psychic abilities and their relationship to paranormal investigation or contact with spirits of the dead come directly out of this. And if we look at what that movement sort of looked like, as far as gender is concerned, women were frequently the communicators with spirits. Women were frequently the mediums, were conducting the seances. But then on the other hand, the men were the more sort of serious sort of researchers that were kind of orchestrating these
I mean,
seances
that goes back
from the
to
fringe.
men were scientists. I mean,
Right.
still,
Hmm.
many sciences are
Hmm.
very male dominated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this idea of the male as the researcher
Yeah.
is ingrained in academia
Yeah. Oh,
in a lot of
100%.
sense.
Yeah.
I do believe that's changing, not nearly quickly
As
enough
quickly as
for
it
my
could.
opinion, but
Hmm. Hmm.
but it is still true. And there are a lot of women who can communicate with spirits in different ways if you
Sure.
look cross
Sure.
culturally, but there are also a lot of men.
A lot of men. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
in the paranormal investigating world, there are a lot of men who can
Hmm.
do this as well. But there is this divide where this is how it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
And I actually credit the Warrens with some of that too in a little
That's
bit more
true.
recent
Yeah, that's a
history.
good point. Yeah, I didn't think about that,
Um,
but yeah, that's true.
Lorraine Warren, whether you agree with there's a lot of controversy surrounding the
Yeah,
Warrens.
regardless about your personal feelings about their strategies and
Right.
approaches to
Yeah.
investigation and the paranormal,
Are
they
a
embodied
huge
this
name. And they
stereotype.
embodied
Yeah,
the
for
stereotype.
sure.
You had Lorraine with her psychic abilities, able to communicate, able to read rooms. I mean, just
Hmm.
a lot of things about, the things that she did were abilities
Yeah,
that she
yeah.
had.
Hmm.
Um, Now, Ed was, of course, the demonologist and much more of
Because
the,
being a demonologist is so macho.
sure, sure.
So manly.
Yeah, and I mean, well, if you look into Catholicism, which I won't go too into, who are the exorcists? Well, they're
Mhm,
priests.
mhm.
Well,
Well, that's just
Catholic
because of the
Church,
Catholic Church.
yeah, the Catholic Church just still hasn't caught up on
Yeah,
that.
they just they still.
And
Yeah.
again, I am Catholic.
Right.
And we can get into that in a whole other episode. But so you have these demonologists coming out of Catholicism and coming out of that, and that's male, very male dominated for reasons that the church determined. So you have this gender divide, and it has remained, and it is still very present. And again, there are people, I don't want to say there's no people who break this mold, because there are, absolutely.
That's true in every culture.
Right. But it is still present, and it's something that I hope will change over the years, because I hope, not just that women will stop being pigeonholed into that space, but that men can enter that space and not be seen as feminine.
Right. Exactly. Yep. I was just about to say the same thing. Yep. Yep.
Because that's not okay either.
Right.
So in any case, get off the soapbox.
Yeah, well, and we'll come back to this, because we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how people experience the paranormal and the uses of the senses, and this is going to come up again when we get to that, but we'll hold that for then. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, or I guess we talked a little bit about this idea within the paranormal that, well, the importance of like experiencing the phenomena, right? Because there are some people who are just like into this from a sort of academic armchair sort of sense, that like they want to read the books and watch the shows and they're not going to go investigate, they just want to learn about it. But there is this sense among a lot of people, I think, that like you want to go out to a haunted location and see some sort of phenomenon, whether it's a full body apparition or, a K2 meter turning on. I can think about the first time I ever investigated, and what did it for me was watching a flashlight turn on by itself. I mean, it was not like over the top, like I did not see Sally walk out of a wall. I just saw a Maglite flashlight turn itself on and then turn itself off in response to questions. And I was like, all right, that's really spooky. Like, and now here we are. But I think, there's this important piece of this that is like, for so many people, seeing the phenomena itself or experiencing it is believing in it.
And it is so cool to watch someone the first.
Oh, it's so cool. I wish I could see my face from that time. Yeah, I wish I could.
I remember you at that time because I had already been doing this, and just watching anybody, not just you, but watching anybody kind of go like, oh my God, what is that? Like that.
I actually just saw that happen.
Yeah, and it's cool to watch.
Yeah.
And so, that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's important to not get too much into like the academic weeds, but just if you'll, indulge me for a second, the way that we think about the senses in a sort of Western or European American sense is really important to kind of understanding how people experience and approach paranormal research. So first and foremost, from a Western scientific perspective, there is this privileging of things that are experienced outside of the body. This idea that like if you see it, it's objective. You didn't influence it.
But it's specifically sight.
Yeah, it's always sight is so there is this kind of hierarchy of senses.
Yep.
In the Western, it's called the sensorium, but we're not going to use that term anymore because that's just too much. Even I will admit. And so you have vision, then you have hearing, and then you have taste, touch. Well, it's usually touch, then taste, then smell, and those last three kind of get mixed in together a little bit sometimes, But
in paranormal investigation, I would argue it's a little bit different.
I would too.
Yeah.
But I think some of this is, we can see some of the this can explain some of the breakdowns in all the things we've talked about, whether it's the gender divide or cleansers versus documenters versus investigators, or the types of evidence that are most important, that we care the most about. Think about it. Seeing a full-bodied apparition, everybody loses their mind over that.
Yeah.
Hearing an EVP, that's a good one. Everyone loses their mind over that.
Or a disembodied voice.
But if you show up, or a disembodied voice. But if you show up and say to me, I smelled something funny in there.
Yeah.
That's not going to ring the same way.
Even though smell is incredibly important.
Yeah, super important.
And I'll go on a little scientific,
yes, go ahead.
Medical kind of tangent here.
Yes.
Smell is the scent. Smell is the scent. Sense. Smell is the sense that is really most associated with memory.
Yeah.
And so, when you smell something, it goes into the olfactory bulb, and then it travels to other areas of the brain, right? And so you get interactions with the amygdala. which is emotion. You
Hmm.
get interactions with the hippocampus, which stores and organizes memory. So if the hippocampus is determining that this smell is important, it's tying it to emotion, it's tying
Hmm.
it to memory, and it's putting it all together. And so decades later,
Hmm.
this is like deep
You
memory.
could smell that weird musty smell from the Sally
And
house.
you will immediately be transported back to that. So, in the sense of
Yep.
making memories
Hmm.
and triggering emotions, smell is so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, and
And we just don't think of it the same way.
well, and part of that is because of, this is going all the way back to like the Enlightenment and this idea of Cartesian mind-body duality, where the mind or reason is higher, is more important than the bodily senses. And then you can add the extra layer of weirdness on this that in the sort of imperial colonial period, so we're talking right after the Enlightenment and kind of overlapping to a degree, um, everyone is, or lots of Europeans are traveling around the world and interacting with people that are very different from them. And there becomes this there becomes this sense that, people who are not relying on sight, sound, not relying on this idea that the mind is separated from the body, um, are more primitive, are less scientific. And so we have this what happens then is this idea that everything beyond vision and hearing becomes sort of associated with the primitive, the less scientific. Um, and that then becomes not only associated with all these other cultures that are not white, but also it becomes broken down on gender. And so we can look back at the spiritualist movement. The men were the ones who were using their minds and sort of coming up with these conclusions about what the paranormal was, while the women were the ones who were the psychic mediums, who were in their bodies, who were experiencing spirits through
And
their
feeling
bodies and
things.
feeling things, right? And so we can dig into that for hours, right? But it's important to kind of think about that, when we consider what sorts of phenomena we care about, and why we care about those phenomena over others, right?
And
Um,
we really do. I mean, so sight is always
yeah,
prioritized. Hearing is prioritized other than oversight. You
right,
know,
right.
but feelings
Mhm.
are completely, and I don't mean just like I feel happy. Like I don't mean
Right, right.
emotion.
But like my chest is tight.
Or
Hmm.
there's that, but there's also like I felt something touch me.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
And what do? We say, really?
Did you?
You sure about
Did
that?
you brush up against your shirt? Was that
Yeah,
on your
like
leg?
was it a spider web?
Was it a spider?
And and if you're in certain locations, there's a really good
It could
possibility that
be.
it is.
It could have been. Yeah.
But why do we blow that off?
Right.
Whereas if someone says to me, I just saw something over there, we're like, oh, what'd you see? What'd you see?
Hmm.
Well, why don't we do the same thing then? Well, did you?
Hmm. Yep.
And my argument is that we should be questioning all the
All of the
senses.
things. Yes.
Not that we shouldn't question feelings, but that
Yeah.
we should question all of the things and try to document what we can and can't experience in different
Hmm.
ways. And I do think you need to include all of the feeling, all of the senses. I will say taste is the one that I've had far less people experience. I
Hmm.
have had a few people who have said they've tasted things,
Hmm.
um, but not nearly as many as some of these other senses.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so don't discount someone who says that
Hmm.
something touched me
Right.
because you don't know,
Hmm.
you know.
Yep. Yep. So now that we've torn this apart and we've angered everyone in the paranormal community,
Yeah.
what is
But
our
that's what anthropologists
we
do.
do
I
we really can ruin anything. We're really good at that.
Yes,
Um,
you can ask our families.
yes, I was gonna say my wife hates watching movies with me because I ruin everything. It's like, oh well, here's the cultural context in which that was made, and that's why this movie's like that. Um, so what's our bottom line here? Like, what's the point? Why what do we think people can do, in our opinion, to be better investigators and be
Yeah.
taken seriously?
Well, and I think the second part of what you said, I think, is what we're really focusing on, and that is to be taken more seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, our goal, in a lot of ways, is to bring paranormal research, paranormal investigation of all kinds, not just ghost hunting,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, into the academic sphere in a way that it has not
Yeah.
been
Yes.
previously. Um, with respect to parapsychologists.
Yeah, oh,
Parapsychologists have
100%.
tried to do some
Yes.
really interesting things,
Vigorously.
and there are some today that are doing that.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also some people in other fields that try to do paranormal research, but it's not respected in the way
Right.
that other types
And
of
I
research is.
and I think that like as anthropologists, we kind of get away with it
Yeah.
because as anthropologists, we by definition, particularly cultural folks, study the weird stuff that people do, and we always have.
Right.
That's like our brand. So
Right.
like we can study this stuff, and no one bats an eye.
But yet there's not a lot of anthropologists doing
No,
this,
and
or at
well,
least
I think
not in a professional-ish kind of
yeah,
way,
well, I
I
think
should say.
the piece that like was where it kind of falls apart is like anthropologists, we can study it and say, oh, well, it's symbolic. It has, X and Y meaning for this community. We
Right.
don't get to sit and oftentimes, with a few key exceptions, Jack Hunter is the bomb. We love him. Um, we don't often ask the question, okay, so I work in this community. They tell me that their ancestors communicate with them through X, Y, and Z means. And we don't stop and pause and go, well, maybe their ancestors actually do
Right. We
contact.
just report out like this is what they're telling us.
They believe this thing.
Right. And we might layer some theory over it
Yeah.
about why they're doing it in context and all of that.
Yeah.
But then we don't go that step further.
We don't push it to use a really heady theoretical term. We don't push it to that ontological question
Right.
of like, what does this mean about like being and like human existence? Which, as anthropologists, we should be asking that question. That's a hill I will die on.
And
like, we should ask those questions.
we want people to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And we want people to ask, is this real?
Right.
And we can talk a lot about, and we probably will over time, talk a lot about, what real means because it's a construct and all of that.
Really real.
But, we need to ask those questions.
Mhm.
And so we would really like more people to ask those questions. And we want more people to go out and do the investigation in a scientific-y,
Scientific adjacent.
yeah, scientific adjacent way, a quasi-scientific
Yeah.
way. We want that to happen, and we encourage people to do that. And we don't want it to be all academics doing
No,
it.
no, God, no.
Because that would be awful.
No. Please, no. Please, no.
But we also want it to be taken seriously by academics because
and we recognize that is a difficult needle to thread.
Yes. But that's where we want to be. That's the space we would like to occupy, and it's what we want others to think about. So what is our approach to doing this? Well, we use sort of a quasi-scientific method in the things that we do. We also use a lot of different technologies, but we don't stop there.
No.
We try all the fun new gadgets that are out there, and they are fun.
They're fun. They are
fun. I love SLS cameras. They're fun.
SLS cameras creepy. I don't, it's just, yeah, if you don't know what an SLS is, go Google it.
Yeah,
it just makes me uncomfortable.
But I mean, I love using these different things, but I don't then say, well, the SLS camera is showing something there, so it's definitely there.
But you're over there, so it must be a ghost.
Right. But we like to use the new technologies. We like to play with them and see, what might work, what might be an interesting new way of doing things. So, when we talk about using scientific methods, not the scientific method, but methods that are used in scientific endeavors, we have a strong background and strong approach focused on observational research. As anthropologists, we are trained very much in observation.
And I think the important thing about that is not just that we're trained in it, but that it's like a really accessible way to do
Yes.
this.
Oh, absolutely.
Like anyone can really learn how to do that pretty easily.
Absolutely.
There's lots of stuff online about how to, do observational research.
And it's about how to make yourself see everything that's there.
It's about how you're seeing and how you're thinking about what you're experiencing. Yeah. It's not about like the equipment you have or don't have. Yeah. So I think it's really an accessible way to do this.
The other piece of, then we didn't talk about this actually, but the other piece of method that we use is interviewing. Yeah. And you see it on the TV shows all the time, right? You see, we talk to the people, what did they experience in the house, being a good interviewer. And again, this is not something that you have to be an anthropologist to do. But being a good interviewer to get really good information from people to understand not only what they experienced, but also the context in which they experienced and how it impacted them. Getting at those pieces is really, really important. And so I think we use a lot of interviewing when we're doing investigation, particularly in private homes. Personal experiences. What do you think of them?
We care about them. Like I think our whole, we should if anyone who's watching this should make a drinking game of how many times we say as anthropologists.
You mean anyone listening, because no one's watching us.
Oh yeah, exactly. How much have I been drinking? No.
You could
Yeah,
do a
anyone
lot of
who's
things.
listening, you could do some serious damage by drinking every time we say anthropologist. Because as anthropologists, we really care about personal experiences. Like that is the core of like what we do. And I think the paranormal is uniquely situated to have that approach be useful as well, right? Like so much about the paranormal is about, the UFO that someone saw in their backyard or the ghost that tickled their feet in the middle of the night or whatever it is, right? And those experiences are really important, but they don't necessarily, and they can help us to gather more evidence to, support the existence of paranormal phenomena, but they are then in and of themselves not necessarily proof. And I think that's something that people tend to struggle with is this idea that, oh, well, I had this personal experience, so it must be proof. Well, we should be just as critical of our personal experiences as we are of
Or
anything
the
else.
opposite. People say there was a personal experience. Well, that doesn't count.
Right.
It
Yeah,
does
exactly.
count. It
Yeah.
absolutely
Right.
does. Particularly you can tell a lot by the impact that the personal experience had on a
Yep.
person.
Yep.
Because when someone experiences something really profound, it changes them in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
and that's an important piece of experiencing the paranormal.
Yeah. And in that same vein, we said, all senses matter. It's important to recognize that, yes, seeing a full-bodied apparition is life-changing, but, you know, that's not the only thing that we should care about. When we're at an investigation, we should be paying attention to all of our senses.
And reminding ourselves that sight isn't the most important
Yes, right,
necessarily.
right.
I can't tell you how many times I've come home from an investigation and one of my kids has said, like, how was it?
Hmm.
What happened? And I'll start talking about some of the experiences we had. Well, did you see anything? That's all they care about.
Yeah,
And it's like,
yeah.
oh, okay.
Well, and I think the other thing too is like I can think of instances where we've done an overnight somewhere and you're tired and you're sitting in a space at like 3 o'clock in the morning and you're just totally wiped and you think you're seeing shadow people walk
Oh,
around.
yeah, sure.
And like, so being critical of that too, I think we are overly critical of senses that are not sight and hearing. And I can tell you there are many times where I've seen stuff at an investigation at 3 o'clock in the morning where it's like, I am almost 99% sure that that's not anything. That's just
Yeah.
you need a nap. And then the other thing that we really think is super important for us, or it's really important for our approach is, getting back to this idea of we can't use one paranormal phenomenon to prove another. We would love to prove all of the paranormal phenomena,
Oh, absolutely.
but we can't prove more than one of them at once.
Right.
And so we need to think about the best ways to use different types of paranormal phenomena in, paranormal research in order to help us to prove the phenomena that we're interested in proving, or not even prove it, but to, collect evidence about it.
Right. So we don't use information from psychic abilities as part of our evidence. It can be anecdotal. And again, I want to make it very clear that it's not that I don't believe that people have those abilities. Some do, some don't. But I don't think it's something that can be used as evidence to
Hmm.
to prove
In and of
something one way or
itself,
the
yeah.
other.
Mhm.
So we don't do that, and that's not to say that we've never investigated with someone who has some type of ability, but that's not part of our evidence
Hmm.
base.
Hmm. And then I think, kind of the biggest one is, well, apart from being critical, which I think that's the most developing critical thought
Hmm.
is underneath all of these, I think, to a
Absolutely.
degree, right? And so being able to think critically about what you're experiencing, how you're approaching any sort of phenomena, whether it's ghost hunting or not. I mean, we just picked ghost hunting because it's kind of the most popular.
Right.
um, whatever it is that you're investigating regarding the paranormal, like being able to think critically about all of the experiences you're having, the experiences you're being told about, the evidence you're collecting, that's like central to all of this. And I think, beyond that, kind of the biggest thing is thinking about all of it holistically, thinking about all of, the history from an environment or from a location. What's the history here? When we talked about the Sally House on a previous episode, we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what's the history of this place? Can we corroborate any of this stuff with Sally? Go listen to the episode and you'll find out whether or not we could. But also, what's the current context? What's going on in the house now? who's coming into the house, what are they doing when they're in the house, and even on a smaller level, thinking about when you're sitting at the investigation, who's in the room with you? What kinds of activity are you getting? How are the environmental factors impacting what you're experiencing? And so trying to take that big picture look, but also kind of being really specific to the experiences you're having in the moment.
Yeah, so that's our approach to doing things, and obviously we are not the experts.
No, I've just put out 4 podcast episodes.
And this is just well, this is our approach to doing things,
Yep.
and others can have their own approaches. One thing I'd love to see happen eventually is that there's some sort of standardized approach,
Yeah,
certainly for
that'd be kind of
reporting out evidence,
yeah.
that kind of thing, and saying like, well, this is how we got this evidence, and you can then judge it however you want, but to be able to say this is how we're doing things.
Right.
And I think it'd be great to see something like that, and I think it's something we'd love to create over time.
Yeah.
So what's next?
So on our next episode, we're gonna take kind of a more, I guess, abstract
We're
topic.
going to the ultimate medical mystery.
That's true. We're going to talk about death and the afterlife. We'll talk about what people think about what happens when you become a ghost.
Talk a little bit about the dying process itself.
Yeah, we're going to really dig into that. So if you're into the biological stuff, if you were particularly into the Morgellons.
Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Human, where the strange, the supernatural, and the deeply human collide. If today's journey into the unknown sparked your curiosity, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with fellow seekers of the extraordinary.
Have a story, question, or theory of your own? Reach out. We want to hear how the paranormal shapes your world, too. You can find us online at Patreon, Facebook, and Instagram.
Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep thinking beyond the human.